My name is Radzinski. I'm the certification officer for GreenCircle Certified, and I'm very happy to have all of you attending today. We are very excited about this waste diversion certification work that we're doing these days, and we do know there's many organizations making landfill-free claims in the market, and with no specific standards out there on what is landfill-free or how companies report this, it's important that we all understand how materials are managed and the direction that this market is going in. So today, when we talk today, we're going to be covering different opportunities for materials that are managed, different means of landfill diversion, as well as a discussion about the standards that are being developed and the direction that things need to go. As we all know, many companies are making landfill-free claims about facilities and their organizations. And as you can see on this slide, this is just a few companies that are making claims out there publicly. One thing that we do know is with no specific standard or information on how these claims are made, most of the companies are self-certifying their claims or just making the claims independently without any verification or certification. And some do a very good job of being very transparent on how they've come to the conclusion that they are landfill free or they've diverted waste from landfill. So what we'll talk about further is the need for developing standards and basically establishing a system so when people are making these claims, it's all done on a level playing field. I would assume that most people on this webinar are very familiar with waste streams and different materials and how they're managed. But if you think about it, there's a lot of materials that come in and out of facilities. Everything from solid and municipal waste, electronics, and electronics can include lamps, ballast, computers. Depending on the size of the organization, construction and demolition waste could be a frequent material that's coming out. Packaging waste, we routinely see many pallets in different organizations depending on if they're manufacturing items. Then there's organics, food, landscaping and biomass, lunchroom waste, all types of recyclables. Many facilities, especially if they're manufacturers, are generating hazardous waste. And then certain companies that are maybe producing pharmaceuticals have a whole different series of waste that come out, like pharmaceutical materials. So with all these different waste streams, analyzing and understanding material flows is really important in order to really be clear on how these claims should be made in regard to landfill free or even a percentage of waste diversion from landfill. What's being counted, what's not being counted, all important to understand. And we do know for sure that waste is all about materials management. Here at GreenCircle, we typically follow a standard practice of understanding total material flows in and out of a facility. If that's not being done, then those claims can maybe not be accounting for all the different materials. And it's important for our various facilities to also understand materials going out as waste. And facilities also need to actively work to reduce waste. The first strategy that we promote and really look for in our certification is understanding that facilities are using source reduction to minimize materials in the first place. If you don't generate the waste in the first place, you don't have to manage it, and we think that source reduction and an active waste reduction program is really critical for successful implementation of going landfill free. There's a number of market drivers right now for waste to landfill reductions and landfill free claims. Many companies have set aspirational goals to be landfill free. There are some that have actively been pursuing this, as I mentioned earlier. There's a number of them that have made these claims. And I am very encouraged and do applaud the different organizations that are doing this kind of work because, it is important in the world of sustainability and improving our system to figure out ways to reduce waste and basically turn materials into useful products or figure out ways that these materials can be brought back and turned into similar or better materials than they once were. If you think about it, many of the companies are making these claims for various reasons. It could be part of their sustainability program. could be part of cost savings. I also think that in the world of sustainability claims, the average consumer can easily understand if a company is saying they're landfill free or they've reduced waste from landfill, because most people can really get that. It's not as complicated as making claims about recycled content, or if a company's completed a life cycle assessment. So things that are easily understood are important in the marketing world for communicating to customers and consumers. There's also supply chain requirements that are coming out. We'll see in a minute when we talk about Walmart that companies like Walmart are forcing their suppliers to really take a hard look at the sustainability activities within their organization. So there are supply chain requirements that are pushing this. And then there are regulations. There's a number of regulations in various states that are banning certain materials from being disposed of landfill, such things as electronics or even food waste, and even C&D waste in some cases is banned from being disposed of in landfills depending on the location. So various drivers, and as you can see here, just an example of Procter & Gamble. Basically, this was a press release they did, and talking about working to send zero consumer or manufacturing waste to landfill is one of their primary goals. So I would say that's definitely part of their sustainability program. That's the way they're marketing that. And as you know, I did mention Walmart. Walmart has made some really great changes. I'm actually pretty excited about the work Walmart has done to really drive sustainability into the marketplace, by Walmart requiring over 100,000 suppliers to answer 15 questions about sustainability back in 2010, and now establishing requirements for what are sustainable materials as far as the sustainability indexes they're doing, and encouraging suppliers to continue to march down this path. I think it's really great. And Walmart itself has a goal of ending landfill waste by 2025. They are in the process now of actively doing this. I did work for EPA for over 10 years, and back in the day when I was at EPA, we were actively working with Walmart, and before they even started really telling their sustainability story, they were actually doing a very good job of recycling and recovering and diverting materials from landfill. And they have done a great job of, like I said, pushing this down the supply chain and getting a lot more organizations interested in this. As you can see here, they even had questions about if you're measuring solid waste, how is it diverted from landfill? Do you have publicly available solid waste reduction goals? So these questions have really made huge changes in the market. I mentioned cost savings earlier. I can tell you that all waste equals lost profit. Having worked as the waste minimization national expert for the Environmental Protection Agency, I worked in hundreds of facilities in my time there and was able to really understand material flows from all types of manufacturers, hospitals, retail, all kinds of different organizations. And integrating source reduction techniques is not only good for the environment and good for society, but it's really great for saving money. And we strongly encouraged that when I was at the agency, and I still march to that in that direction. Really important to really think about how waste can be minimized and avoid disposal costs, tipping fees, but more importantly, losing valuable raw materials, because those materials have excellent value, and there's no way we should be throwing these things into a landfill or into a waste-to-energy plant for disposal. There's also regulations and liability reasons which are driving these landfill-free claims or waste diversion from landfill. E-waste regulation in the U.S. is really happening at the state level, but there's over 25 states now that have legislation mandating e-waste recycling. Pennsylvania in 2013 just passed a disposal ban on e-waste. And it's really interesting now when I'm driving around here, we're in the Philadelphia area, driving around, and on trash day I typically will see televisions or computer monitors sitting on the curb, because people think they can still dispose of them, and they're usually just sit there and there'll be an orange tag on them telling the people that they have to pay to have those recycled now. So that's really changing the market. And I do know from a recent conference I just attended that there's so much electronic waste out there that people just don't know what to do with it. Also, Massachusetts just instituted a food waste ban for landfills, so that's going to help drive composting markets and managing organics in a much better manner. So it's only a matter of time till more states pass regulations, and you're going to see more things banned, and that's really going to continue to push that market. So now let's talk a little bit about current standards for waste to landfill reductions. As I mentioned earlier, there is no standards that exist. I know the Environmental Protection Agency is looking at different definitions and trying to come up with some type of definitions and possible standards for the future. But having worked at EPA, that typically takes a long time to get any kind of regulations or any kind of activities or programs developed. And there are a couple groups right now that are focusing on this. ASTM E60 group on sustainability was formed in 2008, and they actually have a group put together to look at waste generated in manufacturing facilities to help define that, and waste generated at manufacturing facilities for associated claims. There's several standards that are being developed in that area. There's also the UL STP 2799, which is up and running, and I'm actually pretty excited. GreenCircle is a participant on that standards technical panel. So we're in process of assisting with the review and development of waste minimization reporting and assessment of zero waste operations standard. So it's only a matter of time till these standards come out, and once they do, I think it's going to definitely provide a nice level playing field on what's happening, as far as giving all these different organizations that are making claims some type of standard or means of understanding what should be reported, how it should be reported, what the boundaries are. All really important things, because right now there is no guidance on that at all. At GreenCircle, we have developed a guidance for how we quantify and qualify waste diversion from landfill, and I'll explain some of that in a little bit. But in the meantime, we'll continue to follow our guidelines, but we are looking forward to the day when one of these standards is complete. A comprehensive standard will definitely help how companies measure and report zero waste to landfill, and it definitely should include requirements for third-party validation and certification. It's great when companies self-certify, but there's a lot of credibility having a third party come in and evaluate the claim and validate that what is being said is actually occurring. It's also important to note that some of the companies that are reporting right now on their landfill-free claims, their boundaries basically are the gates of their facilities, and they're really not following the materials to understand what happens once they leave their plant's boundary. Is the material actually really getting fully recycled? Is the composting material really getting composted? Is the stuff going to waste energy really going to waste energy? So if there's no follow-up on that, they're not really clear on how those materials are being managed. So I am looking forward to the time when these standards are developed. Now let's talk a little bit about some of the material management strategies that are available and some of the considerations you need to make as you're thinking about landfill-free claims or waste diversion claims, because there's a lot to it. It's not just as simple as, oh, I have a dumpster, this material is going to recycling, or we are composting materials, it's being handled. Like I said, every facility and every organization generates a myriad of different types of materials that are coming out of their facilities. Just about everybody on this phone is going to, at one point in their lifetime, have electronic waste or other materials, or if there's a renovation in the building, there'll be construction and demolition waste. So it's really important to understand those materials and figure out different ways that these can be evaluated. On this slide, what I'm illustrating here is what we deem acceptable means of diversion here at GreenCircle Certified. Number one is source reduction. We definitely want to see that and reuse of materials as much as possible. Recycling is obviously something that we recognize as an acceptable means of diversion. Also, materials that are returned to a supplier. There could be a situation where a company purchases more materials than they need, and they can be shipped back and reutilized or repurposed by the supplier. Reuse in the same process. A number of companies we've evaluated actually can take materials off the process lines, scrap or other materials, and that can be ground up or reintegrated back into the process. Maybe reuse in a different process. Some organizations we're evaluating right now actually have a pretty good system where some of their waste materials are actually byproducts that can be utilized in other facilities and integrated into a product or into a process. Redesigning systems to eliminate waste, I think there's a huge need for this. Actually have just done some training on sustainable product development, and I actually teach a class at Villanova on advanced life cycle assessment and sustainable product design. And we as a society do not do a very good job of designing for end of life, disassembly, materials recovery, those kind of things. So we definitely look at that, and we basically ask for companies to fill us in on if they're doing anything like that. You could also be processing and selling materials to a third party. I mentioned composting or other means of managing organics, such as anaerobic digestion. That's actually an area where I think there's a huge amount of opportunity, especially if you think about a wastewater treatment plant, or some complex facilities might be generating a lot of sludge from their wastewater treatment plants. So if you get into those complicated situations where you're treating wastewater, what are you doing with your sludge? Can it be anaerobically digested? Can it produce some energy? Different things like that. And then last but not least is waste to energy. At GreenCircle Certified, we do not set a specific limit on the amount of materials that can go to waste to energy. We understand that every organization is different. Every organization generates different materials. We also understand that not every company is going to be located with infrastructure for recycling or waste to energy or materials management techniques that would be needed, and there may be impacts that are much higher of having to transport materials long distances. But what we typally look for is the fact that if there are materials going to waste to energy, we want to verify that the materials are non-recyclable with standard infrastructure. Here in the United States, we do have in many areas very good infrastructure for collecting some materials, but we do want to verify that we're not looking into a dumpster and seeing number 1 or 2 plastics going to a waste to energy facility, especially if there's recycling infrastructure available. Now, we also qualify this that we also look at materials that are not economically recoverable. We don't want to see those materials going to a waste to energy facility, because you may have a situation where infrastructure doesn't exist. Material, for the collection and recycling of materials would be very difficult, or have to ship really long distances. There are a lot of manufacturing facilities that are located in really remote locations, or in areas where the local municipalities just don't have that infrastructure. So we do evaluate that, and we do want to verify that we aren't seeing materials that could be recoverable being burned, for waste to energy. Having worked at EPA, I know there's a lot of data that's collected. This is data that was from 2010, but you can see here that municipal solid waste generation is declining. Between 2005 and 2010, there has been a reduction, and a lot of that has come from the increase in recycling. But I can tell you that the recycling rates are still pretty poor. The fact that we can only recycle roughly 34 or 35% of materials in the United States is pretty sad. There needs to be a better development of infrastructure, and needs to be a better means of getting these materials back into a circular economy. And hopefully we'll continue to see that. I'm also excited to see that there's a lot more opportunities for organics management. We're seeing a lot more facilities that are offering composting and different things like that that are coming to be. So good information and good infrastructure being developed, and it really is about continuing to raise awareness. And my feeling is if the number of companies that are making these landfill-free claims or waste diversion from landfill goals, we should see a tremendous increase in recycling rates. And it's going to be up to government and different industries to really start pushing this and getting more infrastructure available, and also an economic system that will recognize the value of these materials. I mentioned earlier about source reduction, and like I said, having been the waste minimization national expert at EPA, source reduction was our number 1 item that we focused on. And if we can eliminate waste at the source, if we can increase efficiency in the use of raw materials, or better yet, just get these different manufacturers or organizations in general to really understand the materials that they bring in and don't utilize, that's really important. Simple things like trying to purchase products with less packaging is another great example of source reduction, or instituting a preventative maintenance program to minimize leaks or spills, good housekeeping. All kinds of different things can be done in facilities. Most companies are working to reduce scrap, and that's another means of source reduction. But I've even seen some organizations, we recently were working with a pharmaceutical company that took a really hard look at their number of office products they were purchasing, and they determined that there was a large number of products they were purchasing and nobody was ever using. They were just basically sitting in closets. So they took inventory, they started to eliminate those products, and basically established a sustainable purchasing program where they were only purchasing materials they really needed, and were able to spend more money on integrating greener products, like purchasing materials with recycled content or bio-based and things like that. So a lot of different ways to approach this, and it could be for an organization as simple as, just an office building, all the way up through a company that's manufacturing complex products, whether it's electronics or automobiles or different things like that. I mentioned earlier comprehensive organics management program. I know there's a number of organizations out there now that are doing an excellent job of providing an outlet for these materials, and many facilities generate organics. Whether it's in a cafeteria or lunchroom waste. I know even here in our office, we have a means of separating organics and doing some composting. But there's a lot of considerations. Just like trying to eliminate waste at the source, food also has a hierarchy for minimization of waste, and that starts with source reduction. I know companies like Aramark and some of the other folks out there actually have programs where they're really taking a hard look at the food materials they purchase, how they're utilized, how to minimize waste, and that's really excellent. Using material, food to feed people or animals. Can the food be used for industrial uses? Can it be anaerobically digested? Can it be composted? Trying to minimize the amount that goes to landfill. So comprehensive program is really important. However, you really have to say, when you are looking at waste diversion from landfill, and we're evaluating various facilities, we do go back to the management companies and we do audit those as much as we can. And compost facilities are really a great way to manage organics, but as all of you know, there's usually a lot of contaminants that end up in the organic stream because most facilities don't do a very good job of separating their materials, and you're going to have contaminants. You got to ask the question, how do they get managed? Is the composting facility stockpiling them? Are they putting them in a dumpster? Are they then sending them off to a landfill? Or are they going off to waste to energy? So these things all really need to be evaluated. EPA does have a great program right now, Food Recovery Challenge. There's a number of organizations that are involved in that, and it's really all about helping save money, helping communities, protecting the environment, and recognizing partner accomplishments. So there's definitely activity out there to help promote food recovery. And I mentioned several times that anaerobic digestion is a great means of managing materials. I just was a speaker at the Advanced Biofuels Conference, and there was actually a facility there that can run municipal solid waste through their anaerobic digesters. So it's not just food waste. They're able to separate other materials and anaerobically digest that, separate. So a lot of great technology out there, and like I mentioned earlier, I think that between wastewater treatment plants and agricultural wastes, concentrated feeding lot waste, there's tremendous opportunity that we can actually create fuels off of waste we already produce. And then those can be used for generating electricity, for fuel in trucks, creating different chemicals, all kinds of great uses. Most of us probably take recycling and material reuse for granted because it's, pretty straightforward. It's actually something that most companies integrate into their waste management activities. But, most of us don't understand what happens once it leaves the facility. Does the waste, is there contaminants within that recycling stream? How are they managed? Are they disposed of in a landfill? Are they burned for energy recovery? Various things that have to be evaluated. And I do think that driving towards a circular economy is critical, and figuring out ways that these materials can be effectively recovered and reutilized and produced into new products is going to be really important. I mentioned e-waste, and as you can see on this slide, the advent of the cell phone, I mean, so much change in technology, and if you think back, many people can probably remember having phones like this and the flip phones, and now we're all, many people are using smartphones. But with rapid technology advances, major increases in consumer purchases, e-waste is really one of the fastest growing waste streams out there. And in the world of waste diversion from landfill, are those materials really being 100% diverted from landfill when they leave your facility? There's a lot of good claims on that, but very complex materials, very hard to manage. They have to be separated. Most are not designed for easy disassembly. There's all kinds of glass that has lead in it, some of hazardous materials. So these things have to be considered. And, there are a number of companies out there. Several of them have landfill-free claims in their process. And, you just really wonder, what about the mixed materials and the plastics? How are they managed? There's definitely a huge need here for sustainable product design and a circular economy for this sector, especially if we have another 3 billion people on the planet that want to live like all of us on the call. I think they're expecting by 2030 that the global middle class will go from about 1.9 billion up to roughly almost 5 billion people. So if that happens, how are we going to really support that kind of growth with new products and different things like that? I mentioned earlier about waste to energy. Again, waste to energy is a very important means of management of materials. Our current system is not perfect. I will tell you that. There's still a tremendous amount of materials going to landfill. But if there's a way to recover energy from the materials that are being disposed of, definitely very important. And like I said earlier, we want to look for non-recyclable and not economically recoverable materials going to waste to energy, and then turning that into, it could be turned into electricity, it can be turned into heat, steam, can be done in a process where we're gasifying materials. I was just at a conference where there's a company that's actually taking plastics and converting them back into liquid fuels, pyrolyzation, landfill gas recovery. These all fall under waste to energy. One thing you have to ask about, though, is if materials are being burned, what happens to the ash? How is it managed? Should you care about that as an organization? I know there's a number of organizations out there that are creating fuels from waste, and that does have some merit, especially if it's non-recyclables or not economically recoverable materials. Those can definitely be captured and pelletized and turned into fuel, where maybe instead of burning coal or some other non-renewable material, we could be burning these waste pellets. And there's definitely some activity there, and we will continue to see that. In the hierarchy, as I mentioned earlier, we definitely want to avoid landfilling materials. Waste to energy is a little bit higher on the hierarchy as far as reducing material waste. But if you compare the two, bottom line is there's going to be definitely some recovery of energy value from the waste if you do waste to energy, whereas in a municipal solid waste landfill, that material is going to be stored for many, many generations, and it does not break down. It's an anaerobic condition. Being at EPA, we did some different mining activities where we dug up materials out of landfills after being in there for 10 or 15 years. And it was amazing how they looked exactly like they did when they went in there. Most people think that these materials go into a landfill and they break down and they become compost or something like that. But in reality, these materials just sit there and produce methane over time. And that methane is really great as long as it's being recovered and effectively utilized. But there have been some LCA studies that have demonstrated that burning materials in a waste energy facility do have reduced greenhouse gases compared to landfill. However, when we burn materials in a waste energy plant, we do have to consider some of the emissions that come out of these things. They are designed with best available technologies to reduce dioxins or NOx or other things that are coming out of the plant, but it is a consideration. We also know that you'll get about 80 to 90% reduction of waste using waste energy, whereas 100% of the waste stored in a landfill is pretty much there for the long term. But we do have to question, how is the ash being managed from a waste energy facility? Is it going off for alternate daily cover? Is it going, in some states it's required that it goes to a hazardous waste landfill where it's being landfilled. So different things to evaluate there. And then we come to the question of hazardous waste. With many of these organizations out there making claims about being landfill free, how are they qualifying and quantifying their hazardous? Here at GreenCircle, we do evaluate that. We look at all materials that are flowing in and out. A number of organizations have done a good job. Procter & Gamble and Unilever do clearly state how they qualify or quantify the hazardous waste. And in some cases, Unilever does not count any hazardous waste in their calculations, whereas Procter & Gamble will, and they're very clear about that. And you can find this information on their websites. Like I said, for people that are making claims, self-certified claims, as long as there's some transparency on those claims, I think it's very good. So now let's talk about the importance of verification and auditing of diversion of waste from landfill. There is definitely a need to validate and audit a company's claims to divert waste materials, especially in the complex world of materials management. It's not as easy as it sounds. There's a lot of materials to manage, a lot of materials to understand, and it is important to follow the materials and determine, is the management company really diverting the materials and doing what they're saying they're doing. I know we had a call the other day from a company that was recycling quite a bit of materials out of their facility, and they felt pretty confident that things were happening, that the materials were being managed properly. Then shortly after the call, they ended up finding out that the company they were sending the materials with was actually illegally dumping them, and their name was on this material. So suddenly they became a potentially responsible party for this, the cleanup and whatnot. So you got to be careful, and you got to understand where the materials are going. And don't get me wrong, there's many people that are doing a really good job of managing. They're doing exactly what they say they are, but there are a number that could be not doing it on a consistent basis, or there could be upsets at a facility, or you could have economic situations where materials go into a MRF, for example, could be being stockpiled, and then they start sending them to landfill because there's no market for them. As many of you are aware, China just recently stopped importing bales of plastics. We call that the China Green Fence, because they were really disturbed by the fact that many of the bales they were getting contained a lot of contaminants and plastics they really didn't want. So they basically shut down the borders and said no more bales of plastics till people in other countries start cleaning up the bales and sending us the materials they're supposed to. So that created a huge stockpile and backlog of mixed plastics and other issues that really created a problem for the MRFs as well as the recyclers here in the U.S. and other areas. So definitely can't count on the fact that because of economics and different things, that just because you think your materials are being managed properly, they may not always be. We also know that the Federal Trade Commission is actually stepping up enforcement of different claims. They don't specifically have any standards around landfill free, but that could change, and FTC is definitely taking a hard look at various claims from different organizations. And if these landfill-free claims do continue, I would imagine at some point they may develop some green guides around that. And we have seen some major enforcement issues, around material content claims. Amazon, Macy's, Sears, they just each got huge fines because they were claiming that different textiles or apparel products that they were selling were made from bamboo when they really were made from rayon. And they got caught doing that, and I think it was over $1 million each that these companies had to pay to the Federal Trade Commission for making these claims. We also know that consumers are really seeing a lot more validity in eco-labels, and Cone Research has done a great job of really understanding what's driving the market, and they assess various people to really survey them and understand what's important to them. And you can see here that certification seals or labels on product packaging were really important for people to understand or have trust in a claim that's being made. So that's another valid point on why third-party certification is important. I do think that the value of third-party certification centers around transparency. Companies that do third-party certification like GreenCircle should have a rigorous evaluation process that provides trusted transparency and will ensure that the company that's making the claims is protected against potential risk of being accused of greenwashing or future FTC enforcement. And having a third party in there, does really get an independent review of the claim and an independent review of an analysis of how materials are being managed in the facility. So there is tremendous value in that. Now I just want to talk a little bit about waste diversion from landfill and how GreenCircle has approached that. Waste diversion definitely demonstrates an organization's commitment to responsible management of end-of-life materials. And again, we think that's really great, and we applaud the companies that are really working hard and have been pioneers in doing this. But we do think it is important to make sure that all the materials are understood and there's mass flow analysis as well as total material flow analysis from not only the point of generation but for the management companies. And that is something that we do follow. As I mentioned earlier, we have our guidelines for qualifying and quantifying waste diversion practices, which we are following internally here. And as we are involved in standards development, we're definitely utilizing the information that we've developed in this standard or in our guidelines to help provide input into future ANSI standards or ASTM standards that might be developed. Our guidelines are set up in a manner where we have background information. We definitely have a focus. We clearly define what are acceptable means of waste diversion, and it's really important that we do take a hard look at the boundary. Like I said, some companies are making the boundary their gates, but we do follow the materials out to the management organizations, whether it's going to a recycler, some material going to a landfill, a composting facility, anaerobic digestion, reuse in another facility, or even waste to energy. We do want to verify that those materials are really flowing in that direction. We do understand also that there are regulatory requirements that some people are going to be required to dispose of materials within a landfill, and we do have exceptions. So if there are local, state, or federal legislation that requires an organization to dispose of materials in a landfill, whether it's hazardous waste or some other thing, we do acknowledge that and recognize that, and that would be documented but would not be counted against the waste diversion goal for the company that we would evaluate. I want to re-emphasize, though, that every organization is really different, and it is important that they be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. Waste diversion from landfill or a landfill-free claim is not going to be one-size-fits-all, and every facility has to be evaluated independently. There could be situations where you might have a retail organization where they have a lot of different stores and their wastes are going to be very similar, where you will get some consistency. But I can tell you every manufacturing facility will be different, whether they're making the same products or not, just due to differences in regional markets and various things like that. It is essential to be assessing facilities on an individual basis. We do have documentation requirements that we follow. To qualify for certification, we definitely have to have at least 6 months of data from the past year. We are looking to get an overview of the operations for the facility, including a list of manufacturing processes if it is a manufacturing company. We also want to know any source reduction practices that are implemented, a list of all waste materials generated at the facility. Then we need data and documentation from materials management companies that display how the materials are handled, and we will be reaching out to them and obtaining documentation and visiting facilities. Any information on materials management organization variability. We have seen situations where different companies will change waste haulers or management companies on a frequent basis, and that's important to know, because if you are switching your materials management company or haulers on a regular basis, you don't know if there's going to be consistency in how the materials are handled. We also need documentation of materials and how they're managed, and we get that from purchasing slips, load tickets, waste bills, verification, different purchase orders, all kinds of information, any way we can document materials. I can tell you that actually getting weight the data on mass or volume is not very easy. Most management companies have a difficult time with doing that. So when people are basically getting things recycled, if it's a small operation, the management companies don't have a very good system of measuring that at this point. And it is a common problem throughout the organization. So we definitely take a hard look at how the material accounting is being done. Is it by volume or is it by weight? And we do know that some management companies use a standard number for calculating, for example, single stream recycling. If you look at different data, the weight of a single stream recycling container, if it's not compacted, could be anywhere from 30 to maybe 70 pounds, depending on what the material is, and that's per cubic yard. And or it could even be higher, depending on it. If it's all paper materials or materials that are fairly heavy, you'll see a lot of differences there. So we do work to try to validate and get some solid information on what the weights could be of especially single stream materials, because there is a lot of airspace in dumpsters that aren't compacted. Our certification process is very straightforward. We work with the companies. We generate a proposal. We sign a non-disclosure agreement with every company we work with. Once we get the proposal and sign manufacturer's agreement, then we submit data requests. We do coordinate data collection and site visits. We get the requested data, and then we basically analyze the data. We're trying to understand what information we have, what documentation we have, what evidence. We validate that, and then we conduct a site visit to not only the facility but the related management companies and verify material flows and understand the operations. Then we will do calculations, and we prepare a report which documents our audit, and then we issue certificates and marks, and we do have mark usage guidelines, and there is a recertification process that we run through. This is just a sample of a certificate. This particular facility had a diversion rate of a 96% rate. This was certified pretty recently by us, and we did run through that process I just showed you there. We also have all our certifications listed on our certified product database, and we not only certify products, but operations get certified as well, so you'll be able to search who is certified. The waste diversion from landfill is fairly new for us. We just rolled it out a few months ago officially, and we are doing some, we are very busy with this right now. We're certifying and analyzing multiple facilities, and it is keeping us busy. GreenCircle is international. We have marks that have been translated into French, Spanish, Chinese, and our marks are used on products around the world or operations claims around the world. And we are affiliated with a number of other organizations. I mentioned ANSI, ASTM. We also are affiliated with various other organizations like the Home Innovation Research Labs, and we recently are involved with the Sustainable Biodiesel Alliance, and we're actually doing certifications now for sustainable biodiesel, and we're working very closely with that group. So just wanted to let you know that we do have various groups that we're involved with. So that covers everything I wanted to talk about in the presentation, and I do have a number of questions here, so I'm going to run down the questions and answer them right now. If any of you have any questions, please type them into the question box and send them over, and I will address them. The first question that is being asked is, can we send out information about, will we be posting the audio and the PowerPoint? This will be definitely available today. We are recording this, and it will be posted on our website. So if there's anybody that was unable to attend, or other folks that might be interested in this, you can definitely access that through our website, and that will be available. There's another question here. How do we feel about claims of methane recovery from food waste that are being landfilled? Well, bottom line is, I think landfill gas recovery is really important and needs to be a management, a means of management, because otherwise that methane is going to be either discharged to the atmosphere and contribute to global warming or greenhouse gases, or it's going to be flared and really provide no value. So I think that material that can be recovered, the landfill gases, and utilized in an effective manner to generate energy is really important. So if I'm not answering the question specifically, if the person that asked that wants to clarify that, I'd be glad to. But there is the bottom line is, think about it. In the United States, in North America, there's a lot of landfills. We got a lot of space. That's why it's so inexpensive to landfill materials here compared to Europe and other areas. And these landfills have been around a long time. There's a lot of legacy issues with landfills. There is opportunities to recover methane from them. Just like I said, we can definitely be anaerobically digesting our sludges from our wastewater treatment plants and creating energy. I do think that we have to effectively harvest these materials. And if there is a situation where it's just food waste going to landfill, again, not an effective use of food waste, because that could be composted and put back into the natural cycle of turning that back into nutrients. But if the landfill gas is being recovered and used for energy recovery, I think that's a good step. Okay, the next question is, considering that we only recover less than 10% of our overall plastic waste, half of which is exported to other countries, and considering China's Operation Green Fence, which has recently denied over 7,600 tons of our plastic scrap in only 3 months, what do you propose we do about plastic pollution? Well, I think that with plastics, that is a huge challenge. The recycling rate for PET plastics, which is number one, that number one resin, is only about 27 or 28% right now. And it is correct. Much of that material is being exported to other countries where it is being recovered. A lot of it is going to waste there because it's contaminated or that kind of thing. And I do know there is major issues with recycling. So there is a movement for different companies that are developing additives that help the plastic biodegrade if it would be disposed of in a landfill, and I think they're excellent, and it should be evaluated as an opportunity. I also think that there are movements towards bioplastics, which are really helpful because it's not using petroleum resources. But I think the bottom line is we as a society have to do a better job of recovering these plastics. And I don't just mean ones and twos, because there's a lot of plastics out there, but we have to do a better job of recovering those plastics and turning them back into useful products or energy if that's the case. But for those that we can't do that, I do think that providing the ability for these things to actually really biodegrade or be turned back into some type of biological material, that's going to be a good thing. Next question is, how important is it to document all material coming into the plant? Packaging material, for example, isn't standardized. That's true. I think that some companies do a pretty good job of understanding all the materials that are coming in, but for us, we do want to understand that, and we really take a hard look at getting a feeling for what is coming in, and that's part of our audit process. So for companies that are having incoming materials, it is critical that you are taking a look at these, but also an accounting of. And packaging material is complex. I mean, you might have a lot of different streams. It could be cardboard. It could be different materials like styrofoam or polyurethane foam or packing peanuts or plastics. I mean, to the best of the ability of understanding what these are, I think a general accounting of the types of materials is important. And again, you'll most likely have some that are going to be used more than others, and that accounting for that is going to be critical to understanding the best way to manage it. Next one was, any experience with or comments about the US EPA's WasteWise program? Yes, I actually do have a lot of experience with that. Having worked in the waste minimization program in EPA, we actively promoted different companies to get involved with WasteWise. WasteWise is a means of companies to manage and measure their generation of materials and to figure out the best ways to divert them from landfill. And WasteWise does provide recognition to companies that do a really good job. If somebody is managing materials and has diverted a huge amount of waste or source reduced a lot of waste, they can typically get an award from the WasteWise program. But I would not tell you that the WasteWise program is a third-party certification. It's going to evaluate and recognize good performance, but they're not really auditing and doing a full validation of the claims or backing up those claims in any way with that WasteWise logo. It is more of a recognition program. Okay, the next question is, do you believe single-stream recycling programs will increase the amount of material China is rejecting? Well, I have mixed emotions about single-stream recycling. In one case, it does help to increase recycling rates in particular facilities, but it also does create a lot of contaminants, and it does create a more complex operation for the MRFs as they're getting these materials in to do that separation. As all of us know, we have some really good technology for separation, but it's not perfect, whether it's, optical sorting or, air sorting, or I know a lot of companies that are doing plastics basically rely on different densities of materials, and they do float sink systems. So it's not perfect, and when you start to throw a lot of materials together, you're going to have situations where if there are contaminants and materials ended up getting wet, you might have paper or cardboard or paper fiber that's not going to be as easily recycled. And I do think that unless we can really optimize our sorting technologies and also minimize the amount of contaminants that are getting into these streams, that there will be situations where without proper sorting and diversion and separation, it could possibly increase the amount of materials that get rejected. I know for our own office, we have a single stream container, and it's not a very large office, so you get some big rainstorms, that container is getting water in it. There's a lot of things that you have to consider there. Next question comes in, do you foresee GreenCircle certification being an aid for any government financial aid for the costs associated with setting up self-composting or self-waste to energy programs? I don't know. I mean, that is something we have had. We're having a lot of discussions with government agencies right now who are interested in the work we're doing. It could be a possibility, though, that we could establish systems to validate materials and how they're handled and how they're managed, and possibly this type of certification could be used for approval of a government program or approval for some type of recognition. I know we're having discussions with different groups about validating materials that are coming out of MRFs and being able to establish different means of verifying specifications for these materials, whether it's a bale of paper or a bale of plastic. So we are in talks with developing systems to certify bales of various materials. So again, not something that we've looked at in the past, but it is something we consider. I've addressed many of the questions. If anybody has any others, I'd be glad to address them. And I hope that people got some good information out of this. If there's any questions at all, please reach out to us. Our contact information is here, and Ashley will be glad to answer any questions. And like I said, this webinar will be posted on our website, and if anybody did not get to attend or they want to have someone else take a look at it, it will be available for review. So I guess we'll give it another minute to see if any other questions come in. I'm not seeing any others popping in just yet. So if we don't get any more, we will just close this out. And oh, wait, I just got another one. Hold on. I want to make sure I'm getting them all. Let's see, one more popped in. I'm sorry. Okay, it says, what resources are being made to small business owners in regard to recycling techniques and opportunities? Well, I can tell you that many of the states within the United States do have programs for small businesses. There's also the small business assistance centers that have been set up through various industrial resource centers that they can definitely help give you some guidance on what materials can be recycled. We actually had a meeting with a group today that has created a recyclopedia, and that's being developed, which will give people some information and resources. But definitely reach out to your small business development centers or like I said, your industrial resource centers. Those folks have a lot of contacts. Also in Pennsylvania, there's a group called the Recycling Market Center that's run here, and they do an excellent job also of assisting organizations with finding outlets for materials and different things that can be done. There's another question that came in. Can you share some resources for recycling harder materials like non-woven glass mat? Yeah, non-woven glass mat is a challenge. This is something I've been looking at for many years, especially having worked at EPA, and we had a number of groups that were looking for outlets for that material. There are some folks that will take it. It can be sometimes ground up and integrated into things like durable goods like ladders, or it could sometimes be integrated into ground up and put, turned back into glass mat. I don't have a specific list on that, but there are some folks out there that I know that do have that availability. And if you're interested in that, you can send us an email and we'd be, try to take a shot at finding, maybe an opportunity for that. And then it says, are you aware of any outlet for a manufacturer's rubber waste? Oh, that's a really good question. In fact, the company we met with today actually helps set up various waste exchanges around the United States, and I did actually see rubber materials on one of the slides they showed today. So yeah, definitely, depending on what state you're in, take a look at the waste exchanges and find out if there is any available, and sometimes you can post those materials on a waste exchange. And they could fall under different titles. It could be a byproduct synergy group, or it could be industrial waste exchange, or different things like this. And these are really websites that are just like Craigslist, where people can post materials and they can either trade them or they can sell them. So I would definitely take a hard look at that. Then there's another question here. Are there alternatives for vinyl? Is vinyl recyclable? Depends on the vinyl. Yes, vinyl is recyclable in certain areas. I wouldn't say it's recyclable across the United States, but depending on the material, if it's a rigid material, there are some companies that are definitely taking that material. I know Certainty Corporation has a program to take back their vinyl siding, and there's a couple other siding and window manufacturers that are out there that are collecting vinyl products. So that is definitely an option, and that is possible. Another one is we are struggling with recycling PVC saw shavings. Again, there are resources out there depending on your location. I know there's definitely a number of PVC recyclers. If you just Google that, you should be able to find some folks out there that can take that material. The saw shavings could possibly be recovered, but they may be too fine of a particle. So I see we're at 3 o'clock. I know many of you probably have to get off to other meetings, so thank you very much for the questions. Thank you all for attending this webinar. And again, any questions, please email us, and we look forward to hearing from you in the future. Thank you.